How's it going, friends? My name is Fringy, and welcome to Fringy Frequency for the 14th of January 2015. Now, I came across an article recently from Joystick, a website that I happen to think isn't complete shit, where they basically announced that they are dropping review scores completely from all of their forthcoming reviews. Now, you may have noticed that this is a trend that a lot of websites are starting to get on the bandwagon for. There are some websites that I don't refer to that have done it, but even people like GameXplain, one of my channels that I do happen to enjoy, they got rid of review scores too. Now, basically the reason that Joystick gave for getting rid of review scores was basically that when it got converted to Metacritic, it kind of fucked it up, because they go on a 5-star scale. So, 1 star off is 20 points off in Metacritic's land. And because Metacritic is such a fucked website in terms of actually combining all this shit together, which we'll get to in a moment, they basically decided, nah, screw it, let's just get rid of review scores. Now, I understand their reasoning for getting rid of review scores, but for me personally, that's not the issue that I have with review scores. Review scores are bad because they don't make sense. What do I mean by this? Now, the thing about review scores that just blows me away is that everybody has to do them. With Metacritic now being used by so many gamers to actually get information on upcoming games, which you should never fucking do. Don't use Metacritic to figure out what games you want. But regardless, because of that, it's become essential for basically critics in most mediums, including movies and video games, to use scores, even though scores don't make any sense. Why don't they make sense? Because you can't just boil down an entire game to a number scale that you use for everything. The thing you need to understand about video games that is different to movies is that when it comes to video games, there are so many different genres, you can't blend them all together and have it make sense. I mean, I've always said this. What is a 9 out of 10 shooter compared to a 9 out of 10 RPG? Are they the same? I fucking hope not. An 8 out of 10 simulator, is that better than an 8 out of 10 action game? It doesn't make sense. You can't boil down an entire game to a number, and the problem with numbers is that everybody starts focusing on the number and not what you said. How many reviews have we seen from IGN, GameSpot, Polygon, and I have to admit, I'm partially guilty of this as well, where everybody's so focused on the number and not what they said in the review. So many problems with, like, the Call of Duty reviews that IGN publish, where they get criticized every single year for how high the score is. How many times could those issues go away if there wasn't a number? If there wasn't a number, what could they criticize? Well, I mean, they could criticize the horrific fucking points and just the complete disregard for the genericness of Call of Duty, but that's a rant for another day. A lot of the issues in gaming could be resolved without numbers, and this is very much true. We've seen publishers really start to focus on Metacritic. I mean, we heard about Destiny, how Bungie lost like millions of dollars a payout from Activision because the game didn't get a high enough Metacritic. And that's because Metacritic is actually used by people to determine what games they want to play. And it shouldn't be. You've got all these motherfuckers who skip to the ends of reviews just to see the number. Scroll down to the bottom of the article just to see the number. Or just go to Metacritic, skip all that shit, and just look at the number. They'll be like, oh, Far Cry 4 got an 86 or something. I'll buy that. Without actually reading the review and looking at the content contained inside to actually figure out whether or not they want that game. A number means jack shit. What the fuck does a 9 mean? Hey, Call of Duty got a 9. Okay, how's the gameplay work? I don't fucking know. How's the story? Didn't read the review. You see what I mean? It's such a fucked scale because you can't apply a scale like that, a completely unchangeable scale that's completely rigid. You can't apply that to an industry filled with so many different ideas. I mean, how does one judge a game and then at the end of the review they spend more time trying to figure out what the fucking number is than just giving a good review? And then you've got critics who are so scared. I mean, we saw this with The Last of Us. Those reviewers were scared to give that game anything less than like a 9.5. Because they knew the reaction people would get. They wouldn't focus on what they said in the review, they'd only be focused on the fucking number. And that's wrong. That's bad for everybody. That's bad for gaming. When so many people are obsessed with numbers that they're not even letting the reviewers focus on reviewing the game. As much as I hate most mainstream gaming outlets, reviewers have a tough job in that regard because they have to put out that opinion knowing that so many fucking morons won't even read what they say and will just skip to the bottom and look at the number. And those little dot points like too much water and all that shit don't cut it. They don't. And the problem with the number system as well is that people always with broken games, which are becoming more and more common, they always say, how can you give this game this number when it will be fixed later? The problem with the number system as well is, what does it reflect? Does it reflect the product at the time of the review? Because that number's permanent. When someone reads a review and the person says, there are these issues at launch, they'll probably be fixed in the future, but these are the issues now, that's fine. Someone gets it a year later and they look at that and they're like, that makes sense. But what if someone gives like the Master Chief Collection a 5? Which I don't think anybody did, but if they gave that a 5 because of the broken launch, someone comes into it 2 years later when those issues are gone, they see the number and they're like, oh, I'm not going to buy it. Even if the problems are fixed. You see the issue that's presented there? A number is so binary that it can't adapt with the change in times. It can't adapt to what's added in the future. I mean, the same thing happened with Titanfall. Titanfall had a lack of content. They could have added shit later for free, or it could have been expanded with DLC. But the number doesn't reflect that. Same thing could happen with a game like and that happens with games at launch too, where the game gets a great number because they're like, well, the bugs will be fixed eventually, so let's disregard that in our review and just give it the number that we think it will be when it's done. You're guessing about how good a game is going to be later, and that doesn't make any fucking sense. And that's bad for gamers too. Hey, Assassin's Creed Unity got a 9 out of 10 because the reviewer thought that it would be fixed later. I'm gonna buy that game. Oh, fuck. It's broken. You see what I mean? And of course, the problem that you have with numbers as well is because it's such a strict binary scale that doesn't adapt or work really well for people to figure out whether a game is good or bad, then you encounter the issue of basically having people always argue about why you gave a game a certain number and why another game was better. Another thing about the number system that does not work is that a game that was 9 out of 10 5 years ago may not be the same as now, and probably won't be. I mean, you could give a game like Call of Duty 4 a 9 out of 10 because if it came out at that time, it would have been a 9 out of 10. But if the same game came out like 2012, and it was just as good, but because of the different landscape, you give it like an 8 or a 7, people are going to be so focused on that. They're going to be so dead set focused on that aspect. And it's stupid. It's really ridiculous. The problem that you have to realize with the strict binary review number is many things. One, it means that the reviewer has to be so focused on the number because they know that's what motherfuckers will always be looking at. They've got to be so focused on figuring out the number that they assign it. And they need to always look at and compare it to their other games. So instead of just reviewing the product before them, they have to focus on the numbers. They have to focus on what they did before, what number they gave to another game before, how that's going to affect their readers, what they're going to think. The number is not reflective of the product because you cannot sum up a 20-hour game into a number. It doesn't work like that. The number is restrictive because it means that they have to lock down into a specific way of reviewing a product instead of reviewing it organically. And the biggest problem with numbers is that they just, things change. Games change. And in a modern industry where you can't tell if a game's going to be fixed later or not, it's bullshit to force a writer to basically be like, well, do I give this game a 6 because it's broken now? Or do I give it a 9 because it will be fixed later? You see the issues that are there. And that's another thing I forgot about the number. The problem with the number is that because it's based on what the author individually, or the video maker, what they individually think, or what matters to them in a game, it doesn't take into consideration what you like in a game. Say, for example, a guy really likes action combat, but you don't, and that game gets like a 9 out of 10. That number means nothing to you because you don't like that style of gameplay. Another guy might give a game a great score because of the story, or because of one mode. These may be aspects of the game that you don't care about, but regardless, they still get included in the score. In the review, that stuff gets explained, but in the score, that shit, No explanation at all. Because they can't. They can't predict what you like. No reviewer can. That's why it's so flawed as well. It doesn't take into consideration what you want. It doesn't show you what aspects of the game were good or bad, and you can't focus on individual aspects to figure out what you want in a game and why you would want to purchase it. Whether it be gameplay, story, presentation, graphics, the number doesn't show any of these things. The number doesn't elaborate or really explain any of these aspects of a game's design. It's too simplistic to do that. It's such a bad, flawed system. And yet we're so obsessed, and I admit that I indulge in this behavior too, yet we're so obsessed with numbers. It's all about numbers. It's all about comparing them by number instead of comparing them by their own individual merits and flaws. It's always, oh, let's compare these games. You know, they gave Call of Duty Advanced Warfare an 8.5 or something, but they gave Ghost a 7. That means it's better. Instead of, you know, realizing that one game is inherently shit, but at the same time, it's a bad way to compare games. It's a very flawed way to compare games. You cannot compare games in such a binary fashion. It just doesn't work. Movies, it kind of works better because a bad movie is a bad movie to everybody, or a good movie is a good movie on the whole. But a 9 out of 10 RPG isn't the same as a 9 out of 10 shooter. It just isn't. And that's why it's such a stupid system. But what do when I do reviews in the future? Do I start using numbers? Because you need them. You really need numbers if you're a small website to actually have anybody pay fucking attention to you. But then it gives restrictions to you. So what the fuck do? Someone like me, what do? I'm stuck in a rock and a hard place. I'll figure it out in the future. But if it were up to me, I wouldn't want review numbers at all. I'd want them all gone across all mediums. But thanks to Metacritic, they basically have to happen now. And thanks to the gamers being so obsessed with the numbers, they have to happen now. And it's fucking us all over. It fucks over developers because it means that they have to always think about the numbers instead of the game. And it fucks over the writers because they have to think about numbers in games. And it fucks over us because we use numbers instead of the content in the review to come to an informed decision. It's a bad system, and it really does need to be just fucking wiped, gone, clear, dismissed, dismantled, and not used because it's a bad system and it's not useful for coming to decisions on games you want to buy. That's it for Fringy Frequency. Thanks for watching. I'm Fringy, and as always, have a good one.